The rain hammered against the war room windows like bullets against steel. Marcus Blackthorne stood with his hands braced against the
This is
oak
our
table,
path.
studying the map
We
with
must
the
move
intensity
swiftly
of
through
a
the
general
mountains before the
planning
storm
a
worsens.
At 52, his body still carried the coiled strength of his youth, though silver now threaded through the dark hair that fell past his shoulders. The scar along his jaw caught the lamplight as he turned toward the door. His twin brother Adrian entered without knocking. They'd shared a womb of childhood and 15 years of joint rule over the Silvercrest pack. The grim set of Adrian's mouth told Marcus everything before a single word was spoken. The message had arrived 3 hours ago via encrypted radio from scouts positioned along the Shadow Ridge border. Adrian dropped the courier bag on the table and pulled out a single sheet of paper. The words were few but carried the weight of mountains. Alpha Dimitri of Shadow Ridge was dying. No heir, no succession plan. Civil war was inevitable. Marcus felt his jaw clench. He'd spent 15 years building Silvercrest into something that could weather any storm. 5,000 wolves called this territory home, nestled in the Olympic Peninsula's temperate rainforests. They'd transformed logging camps and fishing villages into thriving communities. All of it now hung in the balance because a paranoid old bastard 3 territories away had refused to name a successor. Adrian moved to the window, his voice carrying the measured tone of a man delivering a battlefield.
This is our path. We must move swiftly through the mountains before the storm worsens.
His council is already fracturing. General Thaddeus controls the military. Lady Morgana has popular support among civilians. And there's Alpha Dante from the Eastern Territories, Grigori's puppet positioning himself as mediator. Marcus knew the implications. Shadow Ridge shared a 200-mile border with Silvercrest. When civil war erupted, refugees would flood across that border by the thousands. Raiders would follow, and behind them would come Grigori's Eastern Coalition, ready to exploit the chaos. But beneath the tactical discussion, Marcus felt a deeper problem gnawing at him. Shadow Ridge wasn't the only pack facing succession crisis. Silvercrest had one of its own. He and Adrian were 52, both unmated, both without heirs. They'd built an empire but had no one to pass it to. Adrian cut straight to the heart of it. We need an heir, not for sentiment, for survival. The conversation that followed was brief-clipped. They'd avoided this discussion for years, knowing it was necessary but unwilling to face what it required. The problem wasn't finding a suitable female. The problem was finding one who could handle them both as equals, who wouldn't fracture under the pressure of balancing 2 dominant alphas. Marcus made the decision. Get some rest.
This is our path.
At dawn.
We must move
Adrian
swiftly
nodded
through the
and left,
mountains
but
before the
Marcus
storm
didn't bother with
worsens.
sleep. Morning would come whether they were ready or not. Adrian descended into the archives as dawn approached. He'd spent the night methodical as always, moving through decades of pack records. The archives occupied the converted basement of the old mansion, organized with precision that would make a librarian weep. He started with succession records tracing Silvercrest's leadership back through 2 centuries. Patterns emerged quickly. Packs with clear succession survived longer. Packs where succession was contested tended to fracture within a generation. But the records also revealed something intriguing. In Silvercrest's early days, shared rule wasn't uncommon. Twin alphas appearing in the bloodline every few generations. The pack had adapted, developing traditions that recognized dual leadership as legitimate. Adrian pulled another volume, this one ancient, the leather cracked with age. The journal dated back 250 years, written by Alpha Samuel Blackthorne. One entry made Adrian stop cold. Samuel described finding a female from the Moonstone bloodline, a rare genetic line producing wolves with unusual abilities. The entry was frustratingly vague on specifics, but Samuel seemed convinced that bonding with this female would unite warring clans and
This is our path.
Silvercrest as an
We must
enduring
move
power.
swiftly through the mountains before the
Adrian
storm
flipped
worsens.
forward. 3 months later, Samuel's writing was different, less controlled, almost reverent. The bonding had succeeded beyond expectations. The Moonstone Luna had not only united the clans, but brought abilities that strengthened pack bonds themselves. She could sense threats before they materialized, heal fatal injuries, and strengthen connections between pack members through her presence. More intriguing was Samuel's description of her bearing twin sons, establishing the Blackthorne line that eventually produced Marcus and Adrian themselves. She'd lived 50 years as Luna before dying peacefully in her sleep. But the entries about her bloodline ended there. No mention of other Moonstone wolves. It was as if the entire lineage had vanished from history. Adrian sat back, his analytical mind racing. If the Moonstone bloodline still existed, if even one wolf carried those genetics, bonding with her would solve multiple problems simultaneously. Succession crisis resolved. Pack gains a Luna with abilities that could strengthen them from within. And if the old records were accurate, twin alphas bonding with a Moonstone Luna created an unbreakable power structure. He continued searching, pulling every document that mentioned Moonstone or unusual abilities.
This is our path. We must move swiftly through the mountains before the storm worsens.
Geological surveys made him freeze. A birth certificate dated 21 years ago. Mother Catherine Thorne, Father James Thorne Beta to Alpha's Marcus and Adrian Blackthorne. Child Emma Rose Thorne, Catherine Thorne, the same name as Samuel's Luna. Adrian pulled personnel records. James Thorne had served loyally for 3 decades. His mate Catherine had died when their daughter Emma was 3. Official cause childbirth complications. Except Emma was 3 when her mother died, which made that explanation impossible. Adrian felt pieces clicking into place. Catherine Thorne hadn't died from childbirth complications. She'd been murdered, which meant her daughter Emma, currently living quietly in the compound, working in the Pack library, might be the last living Moonstone descendant, might be the solution to everything. He gathered documents and climbed back up as the sun broke over the mountains. Marcus was in the training yard running drills with young warriors. Adrian handed him the documents without preamble. Marcus read, standing right there, his expression shifting from curiosity to shock. When he looked up, his silver eyes were sharp with questions. The daughter, Emma. You're certain? Adrian nodded. The bloodline fits. Catherine's
This is
death
our
suspicious.
path. We must
And if
move
you look at
swiftly
Emma's
through the mountains
behavior,
before the
there are
storm
indicators.
worsens.
She's worked with Omegas for years, helping naturally. Pack members gravitate toward her. I've seen her mediate disputes just by being present. We dismissed it as personality, but it might be ability. Marcus handed the documents back. You're talking about claiming James's daughter, my closest advisor's only child. I'm talking about securing our succession and gaining a Luna whose bloodline suggests she could strengthen the Pack from within. Marcus turned away, processing. Adrian knew his brother well enough to recognize the conflict. James Thorne was more than Beta, he was Marcus's friend. Approaching him with a plan to claim his daughter would test that friendship unpredictably. But the alternative was watching everything crumble because they'd failed to secure succession. Marcus finally turned back. We verify first. I want certainty. Emma carries the bloodline before we approach James. Adrian considered. The Pack medical records. Emma would have had blood work done. If the Moonstone markers are there, they'd show up in genetic panels, even if technicians didn't know what they were looking for. Marcus nodded. Get the records. Verify the bloodline. If it checks out...
This is our path. We must move swiftly through the mountains before the storm worsens.
30 years. He'd learned to recognize when a summons meant trouble. The messenger who appeared at his door carried that particular tension, not quite fear, not quite excitement, but something suggesting whatever waited wasn't routine. He finished his coffee with deliberate calm, kissed Emma goodbye, and made his way to the main building. Both alphas were waiting in the study. Marcus stood at the window back to the room, a posture James recognized as meaning his alpha was wrestling with something against his nature. Adrian sat in a leather chair, expression neutral, in that way he had when he'd already made a decision. James closed the door and waited. Whatever this was, they'd get to it in their own time. Marcus turned from the window first. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of a man delivering news he knew would hit like a hammer. We need to discuss Emma. Ice spread through James's veins. His daughter. They wanted to discuss his daughter. Every protective instinct roared to life, but he kept his expression neutral. Adrian produced a folder laying out documents with methodical precision. Birth certificates, medical records, genetic panels, and underneath historical records dating back centuries. Your mate's maiden name was Catherine Moonstone.
This is our path.
The Moonstone
We must move
bloodline
swiftly
is
through the mountains
extremely
before the
rare,
storm
functionally
worsens.
extinct. But the genetics don't lie. Emma carries the markers. James stared at proof of what he'd spent 2 decades hiding. Catherine had made him promise before she died. Keep Emma safe. Keep her hidden. He'd upheld that promise for 18 years. Now the alphas had discovered the truth anyway. Marcus moved away from the window. Emma is the last known Moonstone descendant. According to historical records, the bloodline produces Luna with abilities that strengthen pack bonds, sense threats, heal injuries. Our ancestor bonded with a moonstone Luna 250 years ago. That union established Silvercrest as a major power. James found his voice rougher than intended. Catherine died protecting Emma from wolves who wanted exactly what you're describing. She fought off 3 assassins, saved our daughter, bled out on our floor. And you want me to hand her over now, paint a target on her back again? Adrian's expression didn't shift. The assassins who killed Catherine were Shadow Ridge wolves hired by someone else, someone who wanted the Moonstone bloodline eliminated. We've gone through the records. The investigation was closed too quickly. Evidence mishandled, witnesses disappeared.
This is our path. We must move swiftly through the mountains before the storm worsens.
And eventually they'll realize Emma exists. James felt his jaw clench. He'd known the investigation was inadequate, had raised objections at the time, but Marcus and Adrian had been dealing with a border crisis and the matter had been pushed aside. Marcus moved closer. Right now, Emma is vulnerable, hidden but unprotected. If our enemies find her first, she'll face exactly what Catherine faced. But if she's bonded to us, claimed publicly as Luna, she becomes untouchable. Anyone coming after her has to go through 2 alphas and 5,000 wolves. James wanted to reject the logic, but he'd been a military strategist too long to ignore sound tactics. Emma couldn't stay hidden forever. If Silvercrest's alphas had found her, others could too. And when they did, Emma would be alone and defenseless. Adrian leaned forward. We're not asking you to hand over your daughter like tribute. We're proposing an alliance that benefits everyone. Emma gains protection of the pack's strongest warriors. The pack gains a Luna whose abilities could strengthen us from within. And we gain an heir, securing succession. James studied the documents again. This wasn't just about Emma's safety or pack succession.
This is our path. We must move swiftly through the mountains before the storm worsens.
Silvercrest needed every advantage. But Emma, shy, bookish Emma, who'd spent her life trying to be invisible, would be terrified. Thrust into a role as Luna would destroy the peaceful life her mother had died protecting. Marcus must have seen the resignation settling over James. We'll train her, teach her to fight, to lead, to use whatever abilities she has, and we'll investigate Catherine's murder properly. Find whoever ordered the hit and ensure they can't threaten Emma. James looked up sharply. Finding Catherine's killers had been his obsession for years. The idea that the Alphas would dedicate resources to that investigation was unexpected. He found himself speaking. I'll agree on 3 conditions. First, Emma must genuinely consent. No coercion beyond explaining the situation honestly. She decides. Marcus nodded immediately. Second, you train her to defend herself before any formal claiming. I won't let her stand exposed until she can protect herself. Adrian inclined his head. Third, you investigate Catherine's murder. I want to know who ordered the hit, and I want them dealt with before Emma stands as your Luna. Both Alphas agreed without hesitation. Marcus extended his hand. James took it, sealing it.
This is our path. We must move swiftly through the mountains before the storm worsens.
He'd aged a decade. He needed to talk to Emma, needed to tell her about her heritage, her mother's real cause of death, the danger she'd been living under. The thought filled him with dread, but the alternative was worse. He found Emma in the library working at her usual table near the windows. She had historical texts open around her, making notes in her precise handwriting. She looked up when he approached, smiling in that gentle way that made everyone around her feel calmer. Moonstone ability, James realized. That smile wasn't just personality, it was power expressing itself unconsciously. He sat across from her, suddenly unsure how to begin. Emma's smile faded as she read his expression. What's wrong? James took a breath and started talking. Catherine's real cause of death, the Moonstone bloodline, the Alphas' proposal, the danger Emma had been living under. He watched his daughter's face cycle through shock, disbelief, horror, and finally a kind of numb acceptance. When he finished, Emma sat silent. Her hands were folded on the table, knuckles white. When she finally spoke, her voice was smaller than he'd ever heard it. Mom died protecting me. You've been protecting me ever since. Now you're asking me to stop hiding.
This is our path. We must move swiftly through the mountains before the storm worsens.
And hope nobody finds you. Eventually someone will. When that happens, you'll face assassins alone. I'll fight to protect you, but it won't be enough. Your mother was stronger than me, and it wasn't enough for her either. Emma flinched. What if I run? You'd be a lone wolf with no pack protection and a genetic signature anyone with a blood sample could trace. You'd last maybe a year. She turned to look out the window. James saw Catherine in her profile, the same quiet strength. Emma wasn't going to break. If I agree, what happens? Marcus and Adrian want your consent before moving forward. They've agreed to train you, first teach you to fight to lead. The formal claiming won't happen until you're ready. Emma nodded slowly. I want to meet them, actually meet them. If I'm spending my life bonded to these wolves, I need to know them first. That was reasonable. I'll arrange it, tonight probably. Emma turned back to face him, and James saw something in her expression that reminded him painfully of Catherine. I'm angry. Angry you kept this from me, angry Mom died, and I never knew the truth. But I understand why. And if this claiming is the only way to survive, then I'll do it. Not because I want to, but because I'm not ready to die.
This is our path. We must move swiftly through the mountains before the storm worsens.
You're braver than you know. Your mother would be proud. The meeting was arranged for sunset in the Alphas' private study. Emma arrived exactly on time, escorted by her father, but insisting he wait outside. She wore simple clothing, jeans, and a sweater, her hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. No attempt to impress, she stood inside the doorway, taking in the room with quick glances. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a large desk, comfortable seating near the fireplace, maps of Silvercrest territory on the walls. It was a working space more than a throne room. Adrian spoke first. Thank you for agreeing to meet with us. We understand this situation wasn't of your choosing. Emma's response was quiet but direct. Neither was my mother's murder or the target that's apparently been on my back since I was 3. At least this conversation offers some possibility of control. Marcus gestured toward the seating near the fireplace. Emma moved to the indicated chair with careful grace, settling in a way that kept her back protected and exits visible. Combat awareness, whether she realized it or not. Marcus took the chair across from her while Adrian remained standing. Your father told you about the Moonstone bloodline.
This is our path. We must move swiftly through the mountains before the storm worsens.
You've been expressing those abilities unconsciously for years. Emma's brow furrowed. I don't have any abilities. She stopped, reconsidering. The Omega Shelter. When I volunteer there, disputes seem to resolve themselves. I thought it was coincidence. Adrian pushed off from the desk. It's not coincidence. You're influencing pack bonds on a subconscious level. That's Moonstone ability expressing itself without training. With proper development, those abilities could be significantly more powerful. Emma processed this, seeing the moment when understanding shifted to something deeper. She'd spent her whole life thinking she was ordinary. Now she was learning every interaction might have been shaped by abilities she didn't know she possessed. So I'm supposed to become some kind of tool for manipulating pack members. There was anger in the question, but also fear beneath it. Marcus leaned forward. You're supposed to become Luna. That means leadership, not manipulation. Using your abilities to strengthen the pack, help wolves who need it create stability where there would otherwise be chaos. Those abilities are part of who you are, whether you develop them or not. The question is whether you control them or they control you.
This is our path. We must move swiftly through the mountains before the storm worsens.
The claiming we're proposing isn't traditional. Shared Luna to twin alphas hasn't happened in Silvercrest for over a century. There's no modern precedent, which means we'll be figuring it out together. That makes you not just Luna, but architect of what this role becomes. Emma looked between them. What do you actually need from me? It was the right question. Marcus answered with the same directness she'd offered. We need you to be visible, to attend council meetings, participate in pack governance, be present at ceremonies. Your visibility protects you, makes it clear that attacking you means attacking all of Silvercrest. We need you to develop your abilities, and we need you to secure succession. Heirs are necessary if Silvercrest is going to survive past our generation. The last point made Emma's face flush slightly. She was finally confronting what being claimed by 2 alphas actually meant physically. Adrian shifted the conversation. We're not expecting immediate intimacy. The formal claiming can wait until you're trained and ready. What we need now is your agreement in principle, acknowledgement that this alliance serves everyone's interests. Emma sat silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice carried steadiness that suggested
This is our path.
internal resolution.
We must move swiftly through the mountains before the storm
I want
worsens.
real training, not just basic self-defense. I want involvement in the investigation into my mother's murder. And I want time 3 months before any formal claiming. 3 months to learn what being Luna means. Marcus exchanged a glance with Adrian. Agreed, all 3 conditions. The conversation continued for another hour. Emma asked intelligent questions about council dynamics, pack politics, current threats. Marcus found himself genuinely engaged, impressed by how quickly she grasped complex situations. When she finally left, Marcus felt cautiously optimistic. Emma wasn't what he'd expected. She had strength independent of her bloodline intelligence that would serve her well and enough self-awareness to recognize her own limitations. Adrian joined him at the window. She'll do. Question is whether we can keep her alive long enough to matter. Marcus watched Emma cross the courtyard below. We'll keep her alive, whatever it takes. The training began the next morning at dawn. Emma showed up, still looking half asleep, dressed in workout clothing James had acquired overnight. The first week was brutal. Marcus pushed her through combat drills that left her gasping and bruised. Emma surprised him by not breaking. She got frustrated.
This is our path.
Angry
We must move swiftly through the mountains before the storm worsens.
By week 2, she was showing real improvement. Her reflexes were sharper, her awareness expanding. She'd never be a warrior in the traditional sense, but she was developing tactical thinking that could keep her alive when pure combat skill failed. Adrian handled the other half of her education, teaching pack law and political maneuvering with methodical precision. Emma absorbed information like a sponge, asking questions that revealed she was thinking several steps ahead. The bond between the 3 of them began forming during those training sessions, built on mutual respect. Marcus valued Emma's refusal to quit. Adrian appreciated her analytical mind, and Emma slowly started to see them as more than just alphas demanding her service. The first real test came during month 2. Emma had been attending council meetings, mostly observing. A territorial dispute came before the council that threatened to splinter into violence. 2 families both claimed rights to a valuable timber tract. The council was deadlocked, 6 members supporting one family, 5 supporting the other. Marcus was about to impose a decision by Alpha authority when Emma spoke up. What if neither family gets exclusive rights? The council turned to look at her. Emma didn't back down. The dispute exists because both
This is our
families need the
path.
timber revenue.
We must move swiftly through the mountains before the storm worsens.
Both families work the tract together, split revenue proportionally. It requires cooperation, but it also means neither family is left desperate. Elder Thomas responded with condescension. That assumes both families will cooperate, which seems unlikely given they've been feuding for 3 generations. Emma's response was calm. It assumes both families prefer profit over pride. If I'm wrong, they'll sabotage the cooperative and prove they care more about hurting each other than helping themselves. At which point, the alphas revoke access entirely, creates incentive for cooperation backed by consequences. The proposal passed 8-4. 2 weeks later, Marcus received reports that both families were working the tracks successfully. Emma's solution had worked, proving her value in ways that rank or bloodline never could. The claiming ceremony was scheduled for the night of the full moon, 3 months after their initial conversation. The night before, Emma requested private meetings with both Marcus and Adrian separately. Marcus met her in the library. I need to know something before tomorrow. This partnership is temporary. Something that serves your purposes until a better option presents itself. The question struck Marcus as sad that she felt the need to ask.
This is our path. We must move swiftly through the mountains before the storm worsens.
The partnership is permanent. We're binding ourselves to you as much as you're binding yourself to us. We need you to succeed, which means we're invested in your success. Not because you're a tool, but because you're a pack now, one of us. Emma studied his face, searching for deception. Some tension in her shoulders eased. I'm still scared. Not of the ceremony itself, but of failing, of not being enough, of letting down the pack or getting someone killed because I made a wrong decision. Dread coiled in Marcus's gut at the vulnerability in her admission. Fear means you understand the stakes. Leaders who aren't scared are either lying or dangerously incompetent. You'll make mistakes, we all do. The question is whether you learn from them. So far, you've proven you can. That's enough. The claiming ceremony began at moonrise, attended by the entire pack and representatives from allied territories. Emma wore white silk, her hair arranged to display her neck in symbolic vulnerability and trust. She walked to the ceremonial platform alone, head high. Marcus and Adrian stood waiting. The ceremony followed ancient protocols. Each cut their palms, then Emma did the same. They pressed bleeding hands together. Blood
This is our path.
words were spoken.
We must move
that
swiftly
bound
through the
them
mountains before the
biology,
storm
magic,
worsens.
and formal pack recognition. The moment their blood mixed, Marcus felt something shift, an awareness that extended beyond normal pack bonds, letting him sense Emma's location and emotional state with uncomfortable clarity. She was terrified, trying to hide it but failing. They drank from a shared chalice, sealing the bond. Ancient magic activated, tying three wolves together in ways that couldn't be undone. Marcus felt the bond solidify. Emma would always be able to sense him and Adrian now. The moment the ritual completed, cheers erupted from the assembled pack. Their Luna was claimed succession secured. But even as celebration began, Marcus felt warning prickle up his spine. The ceremony had gone too smoothly. His combat instincts screamed that something was wrong. Adrian appeared at his shoulder. Feel it too. Something's off. Marcus scanned the crowd. Nothing obvious. Everything normal, which was exactly what worried him. The attack came from inside. Windows shattered as 6 wolves crashed into the great hall, moving with coordinated precision. Marcus's combat reflexes took over instantly. He shoved through the crowd toward Emma Adrian, moving in parallel. The assassins were already heading for her, bypassing easier targets. Marcus reached the first
This is our
assassin before
path.
the wolf could
We
close
must
with
move
Emma.
swiftly through the mountains
fight
before the
was
storm
brief and
worsens.
brutal. Marcus dropped the first one with moves that resulted in a broken neck. Adrian took out a second. That left 4 converging on Emma, who'd frozen in shock. Then Emma moved, not with skill but with desperate efficiency. She used everything Marcus had taught her environment as weapon targeting vulnerabilities, buying time. She threw a chair, followed with a kick to the knee. The assassin went down. The other 3 adapted, splitting up to attack from multiple angles. Emma couldn't handle all 3, but she was buying precious seconds. Marcus reached her as the first assassin recovered, inserting himself between Emma and threat. Adrian took the second from the side, and pack warriors swarmed the third. The fight lasted 90 seconds. When it ended, 5 assassins were dead, and 1 was badly injured but alive. Emma stood with her back against the wall, breathing hard, uninjured, but in shock. Her white dress was splattered with blood. Marcus moved to Emma, blocking her from view. "You're safe. It's over. You did well." Emma's eyes focused on him. She'd survived. She'd actually fought back and survived. The realization steadied her. She straightened and turned to face the assembled pack. "I'm all right. Thank you for your intervention." Her voice carried,
This is our
clearly
path.
projecting calm.
We must move
She
swiftly
probably
through the
could feel.
mountains before the storm
Marcus
worsens.
felt his respect deepen. Adrian had secured the surviving assassin. Marcus moved to join him. The assassin's eyes held resignation. Adrian's voice carried cold precision. "Who sent you?" The assassin smiled, blood staining his teeth. "You'll never find him. The Moonstone line ends tonight." He bit down hard. Poison capsule. The assassin convulsed and went still. Marcus straightened, surveying the carnage. The attack had been planned in for this exact moment. Someone had known the ceremony would happen tonight, known Emma would be vulnerable, positioned assets to exploit that vulnerability, which meant someone on the council was feeding information to enemies. The betrayal was internal. Adrian met his eyes. They'd secured Emma as Luna, but they'd also painted a target on her back. The question was who was behind it and how they'd identify the traitor. The celebration was over. What remained was investigation and the grim reality that they were at war, whether they'd acknowledged it or not. The investigation began within the hour. Adrian pulled together every piece of evidence from the dead assassins. The wolves were professionals' equipment, stripped of identifying.
This is our path.
But
We must move
professionals
swiftly
left
through the
traces
mountains
where
before the
patterns
storm
on weapons,
worsens.
specific training styles visible in how they moved. By dawn, Adrian had preliminary assessments. The assassins were Shadow Ridge military elite unit training visible. But they'd been hired externally. Money trails suggested Eastern Coalition backing. And the intelligence about the ceremony's timing had definitely come from inside Silvercrest. The list of suspects was disturbingly short. Only 12 wolves had that level of access, all council members Marcus had trusted for years. Emma spent the day after the ceremony in her quarters processing the attack. James reported she was shaken but functional, already asking questions about the investigation. Marcus visited Emma late that afternoon, finding her with medical reports spread across her lap. She'd requested autopsy findings, was cross-referencing them against historical attack patterns. 3 months of training hadn't eliminated her instinct to research problems. She looked up when he entered, exhaustion in her eyes but not defeat. The attack was too precise. They knew exactly when and where I'd be vulnerable. Have you identified the leak? Marcus settled into the chair across from her. Not yet, we're working on it. Emma surprised him with her next question. What do you need from me? I can't just sit here.
This is our path.
If someone
We
on
must
the
move
council
swiftly
is
through the
feeding
mountains before the storm
information, I might
worsens.
be able to help identify them. It was reasonable, though Marcus's first instinct was to refuse. But Emma wasn't just some wolf to be protected. She was Luna now, partner in governance. Excluding her would undermine the partnership they'd built. You can observe council members. Watch for unusual behavior, communication patterns that seem off. But you don't confront anyone, and you report everything to Adrian or me before taking action. Emma agreed immediately. She needed purpose. It needed to contribute rather than simply survive. The investigation continued through the following week. Adrian identified financial irregularities in Elder Thomas Aldrin's accounts payments that couldn't be explained by legitimate income. Thomas had a daughter who disappeared 10 years ago, officially listed as dead but never confirmed. It fit the pattern. Find a vulnerability, exploit it ruthlessly. Thomas had served on the council for 4 decades. The idea that he'd been compromised was difficult to accept, but evidence kept pointing in his direction. Marcus arranged a private meeting with Thomas. The old wolf confessed everything. His daughter Clara had been kidnapped a decade ago, held by agents of some shadowy coalition backer called the Architect. Thomas had
This
been
is our
gaining
path.
information ever since.
We must move
He
swiftly through the
provided
mountains before the storm
ceremony timing,
worsens.
security arrangements, everything the assassins needed. Thomas broke down completely. He begged them to save Clara, swore he'd never meant for things to go this far. Marcus listened without sympathy. The traditional punishment for treason was death. But executing Thomas wouldn't save Clara, wouldn't help identify the Architect. Marcus made a decision that probably would have been impossible before Emma's influence. We'll save Clara. You provide every detail about the Architect. Then you serve the pack for 5 years, proving through action that you can be trusted again. If you complete that service genuinely, you can petition for reinstatement. If you fail, exile becomes permanent. Thomas stared in shock, clearly expecting execution. The rescue operation happened 3 days later. Thomas's intelligence led them to a compound 200 miles into coalition territory. Marcus led the strike team, 20 elite warriors plus Adrian. Emma had wanted to come, but Marcus had refused. The compound fell quickly once they breached the perimeter. They extracted Clara from a basement cell, malnourished and traumatized, but alive. The Architect's agents tried to prevent their escape, resulting in a running battle that left 15 coalition wolves dead. They made it back by dawn.
This is our path. We must move swiftly through the mountains before the storm worsens.
Marcus accepted Thomas's thanks with detached courtesy, more focused on intelligence they'd recovered. Documents, communications, financial records, proof that the Architect was real and had been manipulating coalition politics for over a decade. The name kept appearing in encrypted messages, along with references to eliminating the Moonstone bloodline. Emma was waiting when they returned, standing on the compound steps. She'd stayed awake all night. When she saw Marcus alive and mostly uninjured, relief flashed across her face. The bond between them was deepening. Marcus gave her a brief report as they walked to the medical building. Emma listened with focused intensity. By the time they reached Clara's room, Emma had developed her own assessment. Rescuing Clara weakens Thomas's leverage, but it also signals to the Architect that we're willing to conduct operations deep in coalition territory. That changes strategic calculus, makes us look more aggressive, possibly prompts coalition response we're not ready for. Marcus stopped walking. 3 months ago, Emma had been a frightened girl. Now she was analyzing military operations with strategic sophistication. What would you do differently? Emma considered. I wouldn't have gone public with the rescue. Grab Clara quietly, make it look like she escaped. Deny
This is our path. We must move swiftly through the mountains before the storm worsens.
Keep them guessing. It was sound reasoning. Emma was learning to think strategically. They visited Clara briefly, confirming she was recovering. Then Marcus escorted Emma back to her quarters. At her door, Emma turned to face him. Thank you for saving her. Thomas betrayed us, but his daughter didn't deserve what happened. Rescuing her was right. Marcus nodded, accepting the acknowledgement. Emma's approval mattered more than he'd expected. The message arrived 3 hours later. Alpha Dimitri was dead. Shadow Ridge had descended into civil war. The Eastern Coalition was mobilizing. The storm they had been preparing for had finally arrived. The scout's horse collapsed in the courtyard, foam at its mouth. The scout stumbled toward the main building. Adrian met him at the door, accepted the sealed dispatch, and climbed the stairs with deliberate calm. He entered the war room and handed Marcus the document. The wax seal bore Shadow Ridge's crest. Marcus broke the seal and scanned the contents. Alpha Dimitri died at dawn. General Thaddeus has seized the capital. Lady Morgana requests immediate asylum. Adrian moved to the map table. Thaddeus controls the military. Estimates suggest 4,000 trained warriors. Morgana has popular
This is our
support,
path.
maybe 800
We must
fighters,
move swiftly
mostly
through the
civilian
mountains
militia.
before the storm
If
worsens.
she's requesting asylum, Thaddeus is hunting her actively. She won't last 48 hours without intervention. The door opened without knocking. Emma entered, still wearing workout clothing, having run from the practice yard. She moved directly to the map table, scanning the dispatch, processing implications. We back Morgana. Thaddeus in power guarantees conflict within 6 months. Morgana in power creates at least the possibility of stable alliance. Adrian raised the counter-argument. Backing Morgana means committing resources to a civil war that isn't ours. Warriors we need for defense supplies we can't spare if coalition moves against us. Emma's response came without hesitation. If we don't back Morgana, Thaddeus consolidates unopposed. Then he either allies with coalition against us or becomes their target. Either scenario is worse than resource cost of intervention. We're choosing between bad and worse. Bad is preferable. Marcus made the decision with certainty that came from 3 decades of command. We intervene. Small team extracts Morgana, brings her here for evaluation. If she's worth supporting, we commit resources. Adrian nodded, already shifting into operational planning. 12-person extraction team.
This is our
Emma,
path.
you're not going.
We must move swiftly through the
Emma's jaw
mountains before the
tightened.
storm
Marcus
worsens.
cut off her protest. You're Luna. Losing you collapses everything. This operation has acceptable risk for warriors, but unacceptable risk for you. Not negotiable. James appeared in the doorway. If you're going into Shadow Ridge, I'm going with you. Morgana knows me from diplomatic functions. It was sound reasoning. Marcus valued James's counsel, and his combat experience made him an asset. The extraction team assembled within 2 hours. They departed at dusk, moving through forest with practiced efficiency. The border between Silvercrest and Shadow Ridge was porous. The team used routes that avoided control points. Shadow Ridge territory showed signs of neglect everywhere. Overgrown trails, abandoned settlements, infrastructure decaying. Dimitri had spent his final years focused on military strength while letting everything else deteriorate. They encountered refugees 20 miles past the border. Families fleeing the capital, carrying whatever possessions they could manage. Marcus let them pass unmolested. His mission was extraction, not refugee management. James moved beside Marcus. This is what happens when succession fails. Everything Dimitri built collapsing because he refused to name an heir.
This is our path. We must move swiftly through the mountains before the storm worsens.
Silvercrest could easily have ended up like this. They reached Morgana's position by midnight. Intelligence had placed her in a fortified manor house 30 miles from the capital. The manor was burning when they arrived, Thaddeus's forces having attacked an hour earlier. Bodies littered the approach. Marcus signaled the team to spread out. The attack was recent enough that Thaddeus's forces might still be in the area. James spotted movement in the tree line north of the manor. They found Morgana and her personal guard, maybe 20 wolves total, injured and exhausted, preparing for a last stand. Lady Morgana was younger than Marcus had expected, maybe 38. Her eyes carried the hardness of someone who'd watched friends die. She recognized James immediately. Beta Thorn, interesting time for a diplomatic visit. James stepped forward. I received your asylum request. Alpha Marcus Blackthorn is here to extract you, but we need to move now. Thaddeus's forces are maybe 10 minutes behind you. Morgana's expression cycled through surprise and reluctant acceptance. She gestured to her remaining fighters. The extraction became a running battle when Thaddeus's pursuit force caught up 5 miles from the border. Marcus had been expecting it. Thaddeus wouldn't let Morgana escape without effort.
This is our path. We must move swiftly through the mountains before the storm worsens.
The fight lasted 7 minutes before Marcus's team broke contact. They left 8 of Thaddeus's wolves dead paid for, with 3 wounded on their side. They crossed into Silvercrest territory just before dawn. Thaddeus's forces stopped at the border. Morgana collapsed when she realized they were safe, adrenaline crash hitting hard. The team returned to the compound with Morgana and her survivors. Adrian met them at the gate. Emma stood behind him, relief visible despite efforts to maintain composure. Morgana was given quarters in the guest wing. She'd need to recover before negotiations could begin. The council meeting 3 hours later was contentious. Elder Thomas argued against intervention with the passion of someone trying to prove renewed loyalty. Several other members agreed, pointing out limited resources and unlimited threats. Emma waited through 30 minutes of debate before speaking. "We're not intervening in a foreign civil war. We're managing a border crisis that will consume us whether we acknowledge it or not. Thaddeus in power means aggression and eventual conflict. Morgana in power means possibility of stable alliance. The resource cost is high, but the alternative cost is higher. We're choosing between expensive and catastrophic." The logic was sound. The vote passed 75.
This is our path. We must move swiftly through the mountains before the storm worsens.
In exchange for alliance and trade agreements. Morgana was summoned that afternoon for preliminary discussions. Adrian handled formal negotiations. Morgana would receive 1,000 Silvercrest warriors, along with supplies and intelligence support. In exchange, Shadow Ridge would enter formal alliance with Silvercrest. Morgana accepted with minimal haggling, recognizing she had limited leverage. The campaign to install Morgana as Shadow Ridge's alpha began within a week. Marcus led the combined force of 1,000 Silvercrest warriors. Morgana's original survivors. The 20 wolves from the extraction had been joined by several hundred defectors who'd rallied to her cause once word of her rescue spread through Shadow Ridge territory. Intelligence reports suggested more fighters were abandoning Thaddeus's collapsing regime daily. The first engagement happened at a fortified town 50 miles inside Shadow Ridge. Thaddeus had positioned 500 warriors there. Marcus studied the defenses from concealment. The town was defensible but not impregnable. Morgana joined him at the observation point. Thaddeus is stretching his forces thin. He's defending multiple strong points simultaneously rather than concentrating at the capital. It's the strategy of someone afraid of losing territory.
This is our path. We must move swiftly through the mountains before the storm worsens.
The assault began at dawn. Marcus led the main thrust from the south, while Morgana's growing forces attacked from the east. It was textbook combined arms tactics. The battle lasted 4 hours. Thaddeus's forces fought hard but were overwhelmed. Marcus took the town with acceptable losses, 63 warriors dead, out of nearly 2,000 engaged. Word spread quickly through Shadow Ridge. Morgana had returned with Silvercrest backing, was winning engagements. Fence-sitters began defecting, bringing resources and intelligence. The momentum was shifting. Marcus pushed forward aggressively, hitting 3 more strong points in rapid succession. Within 2 weeks, they'd advanced to within 30 miles of the capital. That was when Thaddeus made his move. The attack came at midnight, hitting Morgana's forward camp with overwhelming force. Thaddeus had pulled warriors from defensive positions across Shadow Ridge, concentrating everything for a single decisive engagement. Intelligence suggested he'd committed over 3,000 fighters. Marcus woke to sounds of combat and reacted with instincts honed through decades. The battle became chaos quickly. Marcus organized defensive lines by force of will, directing warriors into positions that created overlapping
This is our
fields of
path.
fire.
We must move
Morgana's
swiftly through the
forces
mountains
fought
before the storm
beside
worsens.
Silvercrest warriors. Morgana herself was in the thick of fighting rallying fighters who were breaking holding positions that should have collapsed. She was earning respect through action. The battle turned when Marcus identified Thaddeus himself in the combat zone. The general was leading from the front, trying to achieve breakthrough through personal example. Marcus directed 20 of his best fighters toward Thaddeus's position, creating a kill zone. Thaddeus chose to fight. He was skilled, but he wasn't Marcus's equal. Marcus put Thaddeus down with moves that looked simple, but required decades to execute properly. The general died with weapon in hand. Thaddeus's death broke his force's cohesion. Wolves who'd fought ferociously when their alpha was alive lost purpose. Some continued fighting until killed. Others fled. The remainder, maybe 1,000 fighters, surrendered to Morgana. The capital fell 2 days later without significant resistance. Morgana was crowned Shadow Ridge's Alpha in a ceremony that mixed traditional protocols with practical necessity. Marcus attended the coronation but departed immediately. The campaign had taken 3 weeks, cost 117 Silvercrest warriors, and achieved exactly what he'd intended: a stable neighbor instead of hostile chaos. He returned to Silvercrest to find the situation had
This is our path.
in his absence.
We must move swiftly through the mountains before the storm
Coalition,
worsens.
by Shadow Ridge's civil war, had mobilized forces along Silvercrest's eastern border. Intelligence suggested 8,000 coalition warriors were preparing for invasion. Adrian had been managing the threat, deploying defensive forces and coordinating with allied packs. But 8,000 attackers against Silvercrest's remaining defensive capacity was a losing proposition. Emma had been working the diplomatic angle. She'd reached out to neutral packs, offering trade concessions and mutual defense agreements. Several had agreed in principle, but getting formal commitments required demonstrating that Silvercrest could actually win. The strategic challenge was complex. Direct military confrontation would be catastrophic, but appearing weak invited attack. They needed to project strength without triggering conflict. Marcus convened a strategic planning session with Adrian and Emma. The solution that emerged was risky but potentially effective: a combination of military demonstration, intelligence manipulation, and diplomatic outreach designed to convince coalition leadership that attacking would cost more than victory was worth. They executed the plan over 3 weeks. Marcus conducted large-scale military exercises along the
This is
border,
our path.
displaying
We must move
combined
swiftly
Silvercrest
through the
and
mountains
Shadow
before the
Ridge
storm
forces that
worsens.
suggested greater capability than actually existed. Adrian leaked carefully crafted intelligence about defensive preparations. Emma worked diplomatic channels, convincing several neutral packs to publicly announce defensive agreements with Silvercrest. The coalition's response was gratifying. Intelligence showed confusion at command level, strategic disagreements about whether invasion remained feasible. Marcus watched the coalition's mobilization slow and stall. The breakthrough came when Alpha Theron of the Northern Reaches withdrew from the coalition. Theron announced publicly that he'd entered defensive pact with Silvercrest. It was exactly the kind of defection Emma had been engineering, and it created cascading effects. Within days, 2 more packs withdrew. The remaining 5 maintained their mobilization, but the force structure had been reduced from 8,000 to maybe 5,000. Still dangerous, but no longer overwhelming. Marcus watched the coalition's mobilization gradually disperse. They'd avoided catastrophic war through diplomacy and strategic deception. The compound had settled back into peacetime routine when Emma delivered news that changed everything. She summoned Marcus and Adrian to a private meeting. Her expression carried a mixture of joy
This is our
and
path.
apprehension.
We must move
Pregnant,
swiftly through the mountains
healer
before the storm
confirmed
worsens.
this morning. Twins. The words hung in the air while Marcus processed implications. Pregnancy meant vulnerability during later stages. It meant succession was secured in the most fundamental way. It also meant danger. Historical records suggested moonstone pregnancies were complicated. Adrian's response was characteristically analytical. The healer gave you probability assessments. What are we working with? Emma's hand moved unconsciously to her stomach. Historical survival rate for moonstone twin pregnancies is approximately 60%. One twin typically doesn't survive to term, and there's elevated risk to the mother during delivery. Marcus felt ice spread through his veins. 60% survival meant 40% failure odds that would be unacceptable in any military operation. He crossed the distance and pulled Emma into an embrace. We'll find a way. Whatever resources we need, whatever specialists can help. 40% failure rate is unacceptable. Emma's arms came around him. She was carrying his children, his and Adrian's both, and the thought of losing her was intolerable. Adrian joined the embrace, the 3 of them standing together. They'd become family, bound by more than blood.
This is our
Pregnancy
path.
complicated
We must
everything.
move swiftly through the mountains
Emma would
before
need
the
to
storm
reduce
worsens.
public appearances. They'd need additional security protocols. And they'd need to prepare for the possibility that historical pattern would repeat. But they'd face those challenges together. Emma had survived assassination attempts, learned to lead in months, helped prevent a war. If anyone could beat 40% odds, it was her. Marcus pulled back. We tell the pack tomorrow. Full announcement. They need to know succession is secured. Emma nodded, accepting the decision. The announcement the next day was received with wine by most pack members and concern from those who understood medical complications, but the overall response was positive. Marcus watched Emma address the assembled pack, saw her project confidence, even knowing she was terrified. She'd become exactly what they needed. The future was still uncertain, but they had time now, months to prepare, and they had each other. The sun set over Silvercrest territory. Somewhere in those woods, pack members went about their lives. That normalcy was what they fought to preserve. Marcus stood at the window watching darkness settle. Behind him, Adrian and Emma were discussing prenatal care protocols. Normal conversation about extraordinary circumstances. This was leadership, not glory or power,
This is our
but
path.
constant work.
We must move swiftly through the mountains before the storm
Marcus had been
worsens.
doing it for 3 decades. He'd keep doing it for as long as necessary. Emma's laughter pulled his attention. She was smiling at something Adrian had said. The bond transmitted her emotional state, still worried, still scared, but also hopeful. Marcus moved to join them at the table. They worked late into the night planning for contingencies. It was detail work, unglamorous and tedious, but necessary. They would make this work. The pregnancy would succeed, the children would survive, and Silvercrest's future would be secured. Because failure wasn't an option Marcus was willing to consider. Not when so much depended on success. He'd done what he set out to do. Protected the pack, secured succession. Whatever came next would build on foundations he'd laid. That was legacy. Not monuments or conquest, but children raised to be better than their parents. Systems built to outlast their creators. Marcus Blackthorne had spent his entire adult life standing between threats and the wolves who depended on his strength. Now with Emma and Adrian beside him and the next generation growing within Emma, he could see the future taking shape. It was enough. After everything they'd survived, it was more than enough. The work continued. The threats never stopped.
This is our
But that was
path.
fine.
We must
Marcus
move
knew how to
swiftly
face
through the
threats.
mountains before the storm
He'd been
worsens.
doing it his entire life, and he'd continue doing it for as long as necessary. Because that was what alphas did. They protected their packs, secured the future, and never stopped fighting until breathing stopped. The compound settled into night routines. Guards rotated shifts. Families prepared for sleep. The normal business of civilization continued. And in the Alpha compound, 3 wolves planned for a future that would outlast them all. The pregnancy announced itself through escalating complications that medical texts had warned about but couldn't adequately prepare them for. Emma's moonstone abilities, dormant or subtle for most of her life, surged with hormonal changes. By month 4, she could barely leave her quarters without assistance, the twins inside her apparently at war. Marcus watched his mate deteriorate day by day, helpless, in ways warfare had never made him feel. The healers did what they could, but their interventions were limited by incomplete understanding of how moonstone genetics interacted with twin pregnancies. Adrian spent weeks in the archives searching for precedents. He found the same pattern repeating. Moonstone twins resulted in the loss of one child, sometimes both, occasionally the mother. Real numbers suggested closer to 45% chance all 3
This is our path.
Victoria
We must move
King appeared
swiftly
at
through the
compound
mountains before the
gates
storm
6 months
worsens.
into the pregnancy, requesting immediate audience. She'd spent the months building intelligence networks throughout the region. Her arrival without warning suggested she'd found something significant. Adrian met with her first. When he emerged 2 hours later, his expression carried particular tension. He found Marcus in the training yard. She found references to a ritual in Shadow Ridge archives. 500 years ago, a Moonstone Luna faced the same crisis. The solution was power split, dividing the Moonstone abilities between the twins. It balanced them, prevented the conflict, killing them both. Marcus processed the information, looking for the catch. What's the cost? Tension knotted Adrian's shoulders. The ritual drains the mother's power completely. The historical Luna survived, but barely. She lived another 10 years, but never regained her abilities. The text suggests the power drain plus physical stress nearly killed her. Marcus felt tension coiling in his gut. Emma would have to choose between her children's survival and her own well-being. Gambling she was strong enough to survive a process that had nearly killed the only other documented case. He found Emma in her quarters that evening, surrounded by medical texts. She'd clearly been researching.
This is our path. We must move swiftly through the mountains before the storm
That
worsens.
combined determination and resignation. I know about the ritual. Victoria brought me copies of the original texts. Her hand rested on her swollen belly. The twins were fighting constantly now. She'd lost weight everywhere except her abdomen face gaunt with exhaustion. Marcus sat beside her. The ritual isn't guaranteed to work. You could die attempting it. Emma's response was immediate and final. I could die doing nothing. At least the ritual gives all three of us a chance. The alternative is watching one or both children die while I survive, which isn't acceptable. It was the kind of absolute statement that ended discussion, though Marcus tried anyway. He presented alternatives, suggested waiting. Emma listened patiently and rejected every argument. Finally, Marcus gave up trying to change her mind and shifted to managing execution. If Emma was determined to attempt this ritual, he'd ensure she had every possible advantage. The ritual was scheduled for the start of month 8. The night before, Emma wrote letters to everyone who mattered. Insurance against the outcome she wouldn't discuss, but clearly considered possible. James spent that night with his daughter. Marcus gave them privacy, but monitored the bond, feeling Emma's emotional state.
This is our path.
Fear,
we must move swiftly through the mountains before the storm worsens.
The ritual began at dawn, conducted in Emma's quarters with only essential personnel present. Emma lay on a bed modified to serve as ceremonial altar. The twins inside her created visible disturbances across her abdomen. Marcus and Adrian stood on either side, close enough to intervene, but unable to prevent what was about to happen. The bond transmitted Emma's terror, mixing with determination. The healers began the ritual. Emma's hands moved to her belly, channeling abilities she'd spent months learning to control. The twins responded immediately, their fighting intensifying as power flooded into them. Emma's face went white with pain as she divided her abilities, golden light to one child, silver shadow to the other, perfect balance requiring more precision than should have been possible. The ritual lasted 7 minutes that felt like hours. Emma's power poured out in waves that became torrents. The healers monitored vital signs with growing alarm, calling out readings that suggested Emma's body was shutting down. The twins were stabilizing, their fighting stopped, but Emma was dying. Marcus felt her life force fading through the bond. His hands moved without conscious direction, grabbing Emma's shoulder with grip that might anchor her to life through sheer refusal to let go. Adrian mirrored his action.
This is our path. We must move swiftly through the mountains before the storm worsens.
Marcus felt his alpha power flowing through the connection drawn out by Emma's need. Adrian's power followed the two of them, sustaining Emma through biology and magic, an absolute refusal to accept her death. The healers were shouting about unprecedented phenomenon, about the bond literally keeping Emma alive. Marcus didn't care about explanations. He cared about the faint pulse he could feel, about Emma's labored breathing that continued despite impossible odds. When the ritual finally completed, Emma was alive, but unconscious, breathing shallow but steady. The twins had quieted completely, their powers balanced and separate. The healers declared cautious success, all three had survived. Marcus sagged with relief that left him shaking. They'd gambled everything on ancient ritual and desperate hope, and somehow it had worked. The cost had been devastating. Emma's moonstone abilities were gone completely, but she was breathing, and that was all that mattered. The twins were born 3 weeks later through procedures that were medically routine compared to the ritual. A boy and a girl, both healthy, both showing signs of the powers Emma had given them. The boy, Alexander, named for Marcus's grandfather, had golden eyes. The girl, Catherine, named for Emma's mother,
this is our
had
path.
silver eyes and
we must move
shadows that
swiftly
moved
through the
strangely
mountains
around
before
her.
the storm worsens.
Emma recovered slowly, her body healing from trauma that should have been fatal. She couldn't sense pack bonds anymore, couldn't heal with a touch. But she was alive to hold her children, to watch them grow, to continue serving as Luna, even without the abilities that had defined her bloodline. The pack celebrated the birth with genuine joy. Emma had given everything to save her children, literally poured her abilities into them to secure Silvercrest's future. The sacrifice resonated with wolves who understood that leadership meant giving rather than taking. Marcus watched his children grow through the exhausting blur of early parenthood. Alexander was confident and outgoing, making friends easily. Catherine was quieter, more thoughtful, spending hours watching before committing to action. Both were intelligent, both showed inherited powers in small ways, and both seemed to understand they were stronger together. The powers the twins displayed were remarkable, even in infancy. Alexander could make other children stop crying simply by being near them. Catherine's shadows moved protectively around her brother. By age 2, they were demonstrating abilities most adult wolves never developed. Emma adapted to life without her abilities with characteristic determination.
This is our path.
Luna with
We
powers
must
for
move
less than a
swiftly
year.
through the mountains before the
Most of her
storm
development
worsens.
had been through intelligence and hard work. Losing those advantages didn't fundamentally change who she was. Marcus found himself falling more deeply in love with Emma as years passed. She'd become his partner, in every sense equal in leadership, trusted advisor, mother to his children, closest friend. The claiming that had started as strategic necessity had evolved into something profound. Adrian experienced similar evolution, his analytical nature finding perfect complement in Emma's thoughtful approach. They would spend hours discussing strategy, while Marcus handled immediate crises, building frameworks that shaped Silvercrest's governance. The twins celebrated their 5th birthday with a party that drew pack members from across the territory. Alexander was gregarious and charming. Catherine hung back initially, but gradually engaged. They complemented each other perfectly. The peace that had settled over Silvercrest lasted a decade, long enough that younger pack members had no memory of earlier crises. That belief shattered when intelligence reported a new alliance forming. Alpha Anton's son of the late Grigori had spent 10 years building relationships and consolidating power. The Southern Alliance consisted of 10 packs totaling roughly 7,000.
This is our path. We must move swiftly through the mountains before the storm worsens.
Disciplined and better led. Adrian's intelligence network reported that Anton's stated goal was revenge for his father's humiliation. The real objective was probably more practical. Silvercrest controlled the most prosperous territory, and claiming it would establish Anton as dominant alpha. Marcus convened a war council that included Alexander and Catherine, now 15 years old. Both had protested they were too young, not ready. Marcus had overruled their objections. You're heirs. That means you learn now while we're available to teach, rather than figuring things out after we're dead. The twins sat at the strategy table looking uncomfortable but determined. Alexander asked tactical questions about enemy capabilities. Catherine focused on strategic implications, asking about Anton's long-term objectives. Emma watched her children with obvious pride. She'd spent 15 years raising them to be leaders. The defense strategy that emerged was multi-layered. Silvercrest would maintain defensive positions, but the real defense would be diplomatic and economic. Emma would reach out to neutral packs. Adrian would leak intelligence about defensive capabilities. Marcus would prepare for the possibility that diplomacy failed. The Southern Alliance attacked.
This is our path.
Launching
We must move
coordinated
swiftly
assaults
through the
across
mountains
multiple
before the storm
border
worsens.
positions. They'd learned from previous failures, hitting hard and fast enough that Silvercrest couldn't concentrate forces for overwhelming counterattack. Marcus threw everything into holding the line, committing reserves earlier than he'd have preferred. Adrian coordinated between defensive positions. Emma managed pack governance and logistics. The fighting settled into brutal stalemate, neither side able to achieve decisive advantage. Casualties mounted as days turned into weeks. The turning point came when Catherine and Alexander, against explicit orders to remain behind defensive lines, used their combined powers to create an opening that allowed Marcus to conduct limited offensive operation. Catherine's shadows obscured their forces' movement, while Alexander's abilities kept warriors coordinated. The operation succeeded in destroying a key supply depot, forcing Anton to retreat. Marcus was furious with his children for disobeying orders and risking themselves. He was also grudgingly proud they'd identified opportunity and executed effectively. Anton requested parley 2 weeks later. Marcus attended with Adrian and Emma. Anton was younger than Marcus had expected, maybe early 30s, with his father's calculating intelligence, but without the reckless aggression.
This is our path. We must move swiftly through the mountains before the storm worsens.
Military victory at acceptable cost. Proposed peace terms that were harsh but not deliberately insulting. Silvercrest would maintain territorial integrity. Anton would withdraw forces. Both sides would enter non-aggression pact lasting minimum 10 years. Marcus accepted after token negotiation. Emma suggested adding trade provisions that gave both sides economic incentive to maintain peace. Anton agreed readily. The peace that followed was real and lasting, maintained through recognition that cooperation benefited everyone more than competition. Anton visited Silvercrest occasionally for trade negotiations, developed grudging respect for the Alphas, and eventually became something approaching an ally. The years that followed were the closest Marcus had come to actual peace. Silvercrest prospered, the twins grew into capable young adults, Threats were replaced by manageable challenges of governance. Marcus found he enjoyed boring immensely. The 20th anniversary of Emma's claiming was celebrated with ceremony that drew representatives from every allied pack and several former enemies who'd become trading partners. Marcus stood beside Emma and Adrian, watching their children, now 20 years old, and actively involved in pack leadership.
This is our path. We must move swiftly through the mountains before the storm worsens.
Catherine remained quieter, but no less effective. Emma had aged gracefully through the decades, auburn hair, streaked with silver, face carrying lines from years of leadership. She'd never regained the abilities she'd sacrificed, but she'd built influence through 2 decades of service. Marcus himself was 72, now still functional, but feeling age. His body carried accumulated damage from decades of combat. He was slower, weaker than Prime, but still capable when threats emerged. Mostly threats stayed away. Adrian had aged similarly, silver dominating his hair, his analytical mind as sharp as ever. The two brothers still functioned as perfectly coordinated unit. The anniversary celebration continued late into the night. When it finally ended, Marcus found himself on the familiar balcony overlooking the compound, Emma and Adrian joining them. Emma broke the comfortable silence. 20 years. I remember being terrified that first night. Somehow we survived anyway. Adrian's response was measured. We survived because you adapted faster than circumstances changed. The claiming was strategic necessity, but you made it into partnership that actually worked. Marcus found himself thinking about legacy, about what they'd leave behind. Silvercrest was strong.
This is our path. We must move swiftly through the mountains before the storm worsens.
Whatever came after their generation, the pack would continue. That was the point of securing succession, ensuring what you built outlasted your ability to maintain it. Marcus had spent his life protecting Silvercrest, making decisions that would haunt him, but kept wolves alive. Now he could see the fruits of those sacrifices. Alexander appeared on the balcony, Catherine beside him. Their presence interrupted nostalgia, pulling Marcus's attention back to present. Alexander spoke first. We need to tell you something. There's a situation developing that requires your counsel. Marcus felt old instincts activate. Apparently retirement wasn't happening yet. But looking at his son's face, serious but confident, worried but not panicked, Marcus realized this was an external threat. This was internal development requiring guidance rather than military response. He gestured for them to continue settling into the familiar role of advisor. Alexander delivered news that was simultaneously predictable and surprising. I've been meeting with someone, Elena Marquez from the Southern Territories, Anton's niece. Marcus processed that information. Alexander pursuing relationship with Anton's family meant potential.
This is our path. We must move swiftly through the mountains before the storm worsens.
From wolves who remembered the war. But mostly it meant the next generation was writing their own story. That was appropriate. That was how succession worked, new leaders making choices previous generation would have approached differently. Tell us about her. Alexander's tension eased. He described Elena with detail that suggested considerable observation, spoke about shared interests and complementary approaches. Catherine added her own assessment, having met Elena, and formed opinions about whether she'd fit within Silvercrest's leadership. The conversation continued for hours, 3 generations discussing implications and possibilities. Marcus offered counsel built from decades of experience. Emma contributed perspective about managing relationships across pack boundaries. Adrian analyzed strategic implications. By the time they finished, dawn was breaking. Marcus felt exhausted but satisfied. Emma leaned against his shoulder. Comfortable intimacy developed over 20 years. Adrian stood at the railing watching sunrise. The twins had returned to their quarters, normal life continuing. Marcus allowed himself a moment of profound gratitude. 20 years ago, he'd been facing succession crisis that threatened everything. That gamble had paid off beyond anything he could have predicted.
This is our path. We must move swiftly through the mountains before the storm worsens.
The bond transmitted emotional states that words couldn't capture. Adrian turned from the railing, his expression carrying the closest thing to contentment Marcus had seen from his brother in years. They'd spent their lives preparing for threats, managing crises. Now they could begin stepping back and letting the next generation handle responsibilities. That was legacy, not monuments or titles, but children raised to be better than their parents, systems built to outlast their creators, values transmitted through example. Marcus had spent 50 years building Silvercrest into something that could survive without him. Now he'd discover whether that building had been successful. The sun continued its steady climb. Wolves began emerging for daily routines. That normalcy was what they'd fought to preserve. Marcus had been managing threats for 3 decades. Now he could begin teaching others to manage them, transitioning from active leadership to advisory role. That was enough. After everything they'd survived, peace was more than enough. It was victory in its truest form, not conquest or domination, but creating circumstances where violence became unnecessary. Marcus watched the sun climb higher, feeling Emma's warmth and Adrian's
This is our
presence.
path. We must move swiftly through the mountains before the storm worsens.
Something worth protecting. The future remained uncertain. It always was, but uncertainty meant possibility rather than threat now. They'd secured Silvercrest's future. The pack would continue long after their generation had passed, carrying forward values and structures they'd established. Their children would face different challenges, make different mistakes, build on foundations previous generation had laid. That was how it should work. Not immortality for the leaders, but continuity for the pack. Marcus pulled Emma close, acknowledging truth in Adrian's earlier words. Their work was complete. Silvercrest stood stronger than any pack in the region, led by heirs prepared for challenges their parents could only imagine. But before Marcus could settle into reflective satisfaction, Alexander spoke again, his voice carrying weight that demanded attention. There's something else you should know. Elena and I have been discussing more than just personal relationship. She's brought intelligence about movements within the Southern Alliance, specifically about her Uncle Anton's succession plans. Marcus straightened old instincts, fully engaged now. Catherine stepped forward, her tactical mind clearly having processed implications her brother was about to share. Anton is planning to step down within 2 years, Catherine explained. He wants to
This is our
retire while he's
path.
still young
We
enough
must
to
move
enjoy
swiftly
it,
through the
but he
mountains
needs
before
to
the storm
ensure
worsens.
succession. Elena suggested a formal alliance between our families, not just trade agreements, but actual kinship bonds that would make future conflicts economically suicidal for both sides. Adrian's analytical mind was already working through the strategic landscape. A marriage alliance between Alexander and Elena would create exactly that structure. Your children would carry bloodlines from both territories, making them stakeholders in both regions' prosperity. It's elegant. Emma's voice carried the wisdom of 2 decades navigating pack politics. It's also risky. Some wolves will see it as Alexander marrying into enemy territory even though we've been at peace for 10 years. Others will worry about divided loyalties if Elena maintains connections to her birth pack. Marcus studied his son's face, recognizing the determination there. Alexander had clearly thought through the complications and decided they were manageable. That was good. Leaders who avoided difficult decisions because of potential complications never accomplished anything significant. What does Elena want? Marcus asked, cutting to the practical reality. Alexander's response was immediate. The same thing we want.
This is our path.
Lasting peace.
We must move
economic
swiftly through the
prosperity,
mountains before the storm
security for the next
worsens.
generation. She spent 10 years watching her uncle try to rebuild after the war. She doesn't want her children to fight the same battles. It was the right answer, the one that suggested genuine partnership rather than political opportunism. Marcus exchanged glances with Adrian and Emma, seeing his own assessment reflected in their expressions. This was worth pursuing. Then bring her here, Marcus said with the decisiveness that had defined his leadership. Formal introduction, proper courtship, under pack observation. If she's genuine about this alliance, she'll accept the scrutiny. If she can't handle wolves questioning her every move, she's not strong enough to be Alexander's mate anyway. Alexander nodded, relief visible in the relaxation of his shoulders. I'll send word to Anton's territory. Elena can be here within a week. Catherine spoke up, her voice carrying the thoughtful consideration that characterized her approach to problems. We should also consider what this means for me. If Alexander marries into an alliance with the southern territories, balance suggests I should pursue connections with other regions. Maybe the northern reaches Alpha Theron has a son around my age who's been trained for leadership. Marcus felt pride swell in his chest. His children weren't just accepting arranged alliances.
This is our path.
Actively
We must
strategizing
move
about
swiftly
how
through
to
the mountains
strengthen
before the storm
Silvercrest
worsens.
through multiple kinship bonds. This was exactly the kind of thinking that would keep the pack strong for generations. Emma's hand found Marcus's, squeezing gently. Through the bond, he felt her satisfaction, her relief that they'd raised children capable of this level of strategic thinking. 20 years of work was paying off in ways that transcended simple succession. Then we have a plan, Adrian said, his voice carrying the satisfaction of a strategist seeing pieces fall into place. Alexander pursues formal courtship with Elena, establishing alliance with the South. Catherine explores connections with the North. And we continue building the network of kinship bonds that makes large-scale warfare economically impossible. Marcus looked at his children, no longer children really, but young adults ready to assume the responsibilities he'd carried for 50 years. Alexander stood tall, confidence earned through 15 years of training and 5 years of active participation in pack governance. Catherine's quiet strength had developed into something formidable, her tactical mind rivaling Adrian's in its precision. They were ready. Not perfectly prepared, no one ever was, but ready enough. The transition he'd been dreading suddenly felt natural, inevitable, right? There's something I need to say.
This is our path. We must move swiftly through the mountains before the storm worsens.
For months, but crystallizing now in this moment. Your mother and I claimed each other because circumstances demanded it. We made it work through respect and partnership, through learning to trust each other despite everything pushing us apart. You're choosing your path deliberately with wisdom we didn't have at your age. That's not just progress, that's evolution. He placed a hand on Alexander's shoulder, then Catherine's, feeling the bond that connected them all, biological, magical, forged through 2 decades of shared challenges. The pack is yours now in all but formal title. Adrian and I will advise when asked, but the decisions are yours to make. The mistakes will be yours to learn from. And the victories, he gestured toward the compound below, peaceful and prosperous in the morning light, will be yours to build upon. The twins absorbed his words with the seriousness they deserved. This wasn't a sudden crisis requiring immediate succession, but a deliberate transition between generations who'd had time to learn from each other. Emma moved to her hand finding his with the ease of 2 decades of partnership. Adrian joined them, the 3 of them presenting the united front that had defined Silvercrest's leadership for 20 years. We did well, Emma said quietly.
This is our path. We must move swiftly through the mountains before the storm worsens.
Build something that will outlast us. Raise children who are better than we were at their age. Created systems that can survive our absence. Adrian's response carried satisfaction rarely heard in his analytical tone. We gave them foundation. What they build on it will be their legacy, not ours. That's exactly how it should work. Marcus pulled Emma close, acknowledging the truth in Adrian's words. Their work was complete, not in the sense that all threats had been eliminated or all problems solved, but in the sense that they'd accomplished what they'd set out to achieve 2 decades ago. Silvercrest stood stronger than any pack in the region, led by heirs who were prepared for challenges their parents could only imagine. The succession crisis that had threatened everything was now resolved so thoroughly that transition would be seamless, rather than catastrophic. The claiming that had started as desperate strategic necessity had become the foundation for something greater. A family, yes, but also a model for leadership that balanced strength with compassion, tradition with innovation, individual power with collective welfare. The sun climbed higher, burning off the last traces of morning mist. Below them, the compound continued its daily routines. Children heading to school, warriors training the endless work of civilization.
This is our path. We must move swiftly through the mountains before the storm worsens.
That normalcy was their truest victory. Not the battles won or territories secured or enemies defeated, but the peaceful life they'd created for thousands of wolves who would never know how close they'd come to losing everything. Marcus took a final look at the territory he'd spent his life protecting, then turned toward the door. There was work still to be done, there always was, but it was work for younger wolves now. His role had evolved from warrior to advisor, from alpha to elder statesman, who could offer wisdom without needing to control implementation. It was enough. After everything they'd survived, everything they'd built, everything they'd sacrificed and gained peace was more than enough. He walked inside with Emma and Adrian, his children staying behind to continue discussions about futures that belonged to them. The cycle continued, one generation stepping back as the next stepped forward, continuity maintained through deliberate preparation rather than crisis management. This was legacy, not monuments or conquest or territories that would eventually be lost, but children raised to be better than their parents. Systems built to outlast their creators. Values transmitted through example rather than decree. Bonds forged through shared struggle that would endure long after the original
This is our
architects were gone.
path. We must move swiftly through the mountains before the storm worsens.
Against every threat that emerged from the chaos beyond their borders. He'd made decisions that haunted him, paid prices that still ached in quiet moments, stood between death and the wolves who depended on his strength, even when he felt that strength failing. Now finally he could rest. Not the rest of death or defeat, but the rest of completion. The satisfaction of seeing a task finished, a responsibility successfully transferred, a future secured not through his continued vigilance, but through the capability of those who would continue after him. The pack would continue. His children would lead. Emma and Adrian would be there to guide and support. And Marcus could finally allow himself to believe that survival wasn't measured in days or weeks, but in generations. That was enough. That was everything. The morning light filled the corridors as he walked, illuminating portraits of alphas who'd come before Samuel Blackthorne, who'd first bonded with a Moonstone Luna, and established the precedent Marcus had followed without knowing. Other leaders whose names were remembered in the histories Emma had spent so much time studying. Warriors and strategists and diplomats who'd each contributed something to the structure Marcus had inherited and now passed forward. He stopped before his own.
This is our path. We must move swiftly through the mountains before the storm worsens.
It was time to formalize his place in that history. The artist had captured him well, not softening the scars or hiding the silver in his hair, but showing the strength that remained and the wisdom that came from decades of leadership. Beside his portrait would eventually hang Adrian's and Emma's, and someday Alexander's and Catherine's. The visual record of leadership passing from one generation to the next, each building on what came before, while adapting to new challenges and opportunities. That continuity was what mattered. Not individual glory or personal legacy, but the unbroken chain connecting past to future, ensuring that lessons learned weren't lost and mistakes made weren't endlessly repeated. Marcus continued walking, his footsteps echoing in the quiet corridors. Somewhere in the compound, pack life continued, breakfast being prepared, children getting ready for school, warriors beginning their training routines. The ordinary business of civilization that only existed because someone was willing to do the extraordinary work of protecting it. He'd done that work for 50 years. Now it was time to teach others how to do it, to step back from active leadership while remaining available for counsel, to trust that the foundation he'd laid was strong enough to support.
This is our path.
Outside,
we must move swiftly through the mountains before the storm worsens.
And illuminating the forest that stretched endlessly beyond the compound. Somewhere in those woods, threats still existed, they always would. But Silvercrest was ready for them, led by wolves who understood that strength came not just from individual power, but from collective commitment to shared values. Marcus Blackthorne had built that. With Adrian's strategic brilliance and Emma's compassionate wisdom, he'd transformed a pack facing succession crisis into something that could endure for generations. That was legacy. That was triumph. That was enough. He reached his private quarters and paused at the threshold, looking back down the corridor toward where Emma and Adrian would be finishing their own morning routines. In a few hours, they'd reconvene for the daily briefings that would gradually transition from his responsibility to Alexander's. Next week, Elena would arrive for formal introduction. Next month, Catherine would visit the northern reaches to explore potential alliances there. The work continued, the wheel turned, the pack endured, and Marcus Blackthorne Alpha of Silvercrest for 3 decades could finally allow himself to believe that his watch was ending, not in failure but in success. He stepped into his quarters and closed the door, ready for whatever the next chapter would bring.
This is our path. We must move swiftly through the mountains before the storm worsens.
Everything else was just details in service of that singular, essential truth. And in the morning light streaming through his windows, illuminating a territory finally at peace, Marcus allowed himself a smile. They'd done it. Against impossible odds and through unimaginable challenges, they'd actually done it. The future was secure. The pack would endure. The legacy was complete. Finally, Marcus could rest.